What is up guys, Delboy here, just doing a prediction video for George Groves versus Callum Smith. This is the final of the World Boxing Super Series Super Middleweight Tournament, and it is going to be for George Groves' WBA Super Middleweight title. Have to say, really looking forward to this fight. I think it's quite an intriguing fight actually. Let's briefly run through the fighter's records and attributes. George Groves has a record of 28 wins, 3 defeats, 0 draws, 20 of those 28 wins coming by way of knockout. George Groves, for the most part throughout his career, has fought quite a high level of competition, been in there with the likes of Carl Froch twice, James DeGale, Badu Jack, Fedor Chudinov, Chris Eubank Jr. You know, George Groves has been in there with some stiff competition over the years. Callum Smith has a record of 24 wins, 0 defeats, 0 draws, 17 of those 24 wins coming by way of stoppage. So, you know, Callum Smith has had less fights than George Groves, and he's not fought at the level of George Groves. So if we're talking about experience, you know, you've got to give that to George Groves. George Groves has had the ups and the downs. He knows what it's like to be at the top of a division. He knows what it's like to come up short. And, you know, he's really experienced at this point. There's not much George Groves hasn't seen in the ring. And obviously that could be to his advantage. Callum Smith, I mean, what would you say are his best wins? I would say Erik Skoglund. Erik Skoglund was a good European level operator. Rocky Fielding again. Rocky Fielding went on to win a version of the world title. So yeah, that's a decent win. But that's pretty much the best guys he's fought. He's fought Christopher Abrase, again, European level guy. You know, Callum Smith, he's not fought absolute scrubs by any means, but he hasn't got an elite world level name on his resume yet. So Callum Smith, to this day, is still largely unproven, to be honest with you. And it's hard to say how good he is. Let's talk about the height and reach of both guys. George Groves, he is listed as 5'11.5" with a 72-inch reach, whereas Callum Smith is listed as 6'3". And from what I've seen online, he has a reach of nearly 78 inches. So, you know, Callum Smith is 3.5 inches taller than George Groves, and not only that, he has pretty much a 6-inch reach advantage on George Groves, so Callum Smith is clearly the bigger man in this fight, and that could be to his advantage. I mentioned earlier that George Groves has more experience, he's had more fights, but he also has more wear and tear, and that is one of the biggest factors going into this fight. Obviously, George Groves in the Chris Eubank Jr. fight dislocated his left shoulder, his jab hand. George Groves' jab is his most important punch, without a doubt. How has that arm healed up over the last few months? You know, this fight took quite some time to finalise. You know, how has George Groves been recovering? Is he at 100%? I'm not sure about it. I mean, quite a few people online are saying that those type of injuries are very, very serious, and sometimes it takes a long time for your body to recover, if they even recover fully. So how does George Groves' shoulder hold up in this fight? And can Callum Smith target that? That's going to be interesting. You know, Callum Smith is a bigger man. If George Groves can't maintain his jab and keep range and keep Callum Smith at bay, he could be in for a long night. But stylistically, I think ordinarily I would pick George Groves to beat Callum Smith. To me, George Groves is just a better all-round boxer. Quicker feet, quicker hands, better one-punch knockout power, and better technical ability. Groves has a really good jab, as I mentioned, and he's got a good right hand behind it. He does pretty good at dictating range. He's good at keeping you at the end of his jab. And Callum Smith, to me, is a guy who, his skill set is pretty well rounded, but he doesn't really do anything spectacular. Doesn't have blaring hand speed, doesn't have crazy one-punch knockout power, not a master boxer. Defensively, he's okay, but nothing special. It's pretty much just a high guard and nothing else. No head movement, no waist movement, no quick feet. You know, Callum Smith, basically, his only defence is blocking. No slipping, no rolling, you know, nothing like that. And I think against movers, against guys with jabs, he's going to struggle. We saw that against Erik Skoglund. Erik Skoglund's jab was consistently landing on Callum Smith, and Eric Skoglund's quicker feet and quicker hands gave Callum Smith a lot of issues. And Skoglund isn't the puncher that George Groves is. He's not the boxer that George Groves is. He doesn't have the experience that George Groves has, and if he's landing on Callum Smith quite regularly, you'd imagine George Groves is going to find those same openings. These are openings that I don't think Callum Smith can really rectify in the lead up to this George Groves fight, because they've always been there. You know, we've always seen Callum Smith eat jabs for fun. We go back to the Viva Brasse fight, eating a lot of jabs. The Skoglund fight, like I mentioned, eating jabs. In the pocket, yes, he's actually quite good in the pocket, actually, Callum Smith. Really good hook in the pocket. He can actually counter quite well up close, but he does get hit up close. The body's open. He's a big, tall man. The body's open for Callum Smith, you know. I think there's a lot of holes in Callum Smith's defence that George Groves has the ability to exploit. You know, Groves, you know, he is actually quite an underrated body puncher. Under Shane McGuigan, Groves has actually been targeting the body a lot more. You know, we saw the knockout against Jamie Cox, body shot knockout. Even against Eubank Jr., Groves was sinking in body shots here and there to try and slow Eubank Jr. down. It's something he's really added to his game in recent months. So, you know, I feel that that's another area of success George Groves might have in this fight is the body. There's a lot of body to hit with Callum Smith. Another good George Groves punch is his right uppercut. I feel that that's a good punch of George Groves. And again, Callum Smith, and we say this about Joe Gallagher fighters, you know, he comes forward with flat feet and a high guard. His head never leaves that centre line. He's there for that right uppercut from George Groves. You know, if Groves can time it, that shot's going to be there. I feel that Callum Smith stylistically matches up quite well for George Groves. But I do still think Callum Smith could give George Groves a tough fight. Firstly, like I said, there's a bit of a asterisk next to this fight because how does George Groves' shoulder heal up? If it's not healed up, this could be a disastrous night for him because Callum Smith is a big lump. You know, he has decent power, he's strong, he's a good body puncher. So if he gets up close and starts to work George Groves over, I wouldn't be surprised to see George Groves fold. And another thing, how tough is Callum Smith? What's his chin like? Let's say he can take George Groves' power and he keeps on marching forward and he keeps on sinking those body shots in that he does do very well. How does George Groves react? Especially in the second half of the fight. You know, Callum Smith has gone 12 rounds quite a few times at this point. And, you know, he does for 12 rounds okay. Pretty steady throughout. So if he's still there coming forward, how does George Groves react to that? I'm not so sure. You know, George Groves in the past has kind of had a reputation as having bad stamina. And if Callum can work the body, if Callum can get up close, if Callum can sort of lean on George Groves and make it a tough fight, you know, maybe he can win this. But boxer for boxer, skills for skills, I do feel George Groves is a level above in terms of most things. You know, hand speed, like I said, foot speed, power, technical ability, especially from long range. You know, I feel Groves is better. But, you know, Callum Smith, I think without doubt, is fresher. He's bigger, he's stronger, and might respond better to a tough fight because, like I said, George Groves is coming off a tough fight. Yes, he won that Eubank Jr. fight quite clearly, but it was still a tough fight. You know, Eubank still put it on him at times. It was still a high-octane fight, and obviously his shoulder came out of place. So I can definitely see Callum Smith winning it, but I've got to go with what I see in terms of the skills. And I feel George Groves overall is a level above. I'm going to go with a George Groves points win. Not particularly confident. If George wasn't coming off that shoulder injury, I would confidently pick him. But the reality is he's not. He's coming off a serious injury. We've seen fighters fight off the back of serious injuries in the past, notably David Haye recently. And, you know, these guys never recover for the most part. So how does George Groves recover in this short space of time? That's the question for me. But I am going to go with a George Groves points win. Like I said, not confident, but I'm looking forward to the fight. And also the fight is actually in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. A lot of people in the UK had a big problem with this. And I can get their I get their sentiment, don't get me wrong. I understand why they are frustrated. But at the same time, the World Boxing Super Series is supposed to be a world tournament. It's supposed to be staged all over the globe, in Europe, in Asia, in America, the Middle East, etc., etc. So, although I can understand why people are upset, I'm not that bothered about it, I've got to say. But what do you guys think? Peace.